She thought walking into the desert would be easier than facing the truth, until a stranger with a badge knew her name. What happens when the one person who promised to protect you throws you away like yesterday's newspaper? When a young woman from Boston steps off a train in 1878 Arizona with nowhere to go and $3 to her name, the last thing she expects is a cowboy sheriff who seems to know everything about her betrayal. But Reed Callahan's calm voice stops her cold. Your journey ends with me, miss. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's journey has traveled. The train's whistle cut through the Arizona heat like a knife through butter, and Clara Winthrop felt her heart lurch with every metallic shriek. Dust swirled around the wooden platform of the depot, coating her dark traveling dress with a fine layer of grit that would have horrified her Boston friends. But Clara had left those friends behind 3 weeks ago, along with everything else she'd ever known. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the handle of her worn leather valise. The only possession she'd managed to keep after her mother's debts had swallowed their small inheritance whole. Inside were 2 dresses, a Bible her mother had given her before the fever took her, and a small Derringer pistol that Clara barely knew how to use. The weight of the gun had terrified her when she'd bought it from a pawn shop on her last day in Boston, but the ticketmaster had warned her that a woman traveling alone needed protection. Silver Creek Station, the conductor bellowed, his voice barely audible over the hissing steam. Silver Creek, 10-minute stop. Clara's chest tightened. This was it. The place where her father, the man who'd abandoned her and her mother 15 years ago to chase silver and dreams in the Western Territories, had finally agreed to take her in. His letter had been brief, almost cold, but it was a lifeline when she had nothing else. Come to Silver Creek. I'll meet you at the depot. We'll talk then. 4 sentences. 15 years of silence, and he'd given her 4 sentences. The train lurched to a complete stop, and Clara stepped down onto the platform, her button-up boots sinking slightly into the powdery dirt. The heat hit her like a physical force, nothing like the humid summers of Massachusetts, but a dry, relentless warmth that seemed to pull moisture from her skin. She blinked against the brilliant sunlight, scanning the platform for a familiar face she wasn't even sure she'd recognize. A handful of people milled about, a rancher loading supplies, 2 women in simple calico dresses chatting near a water barrel, a Mexican family herding 3 children toward the train. But no one approached her. No one called her name. Clara's stomach twisted into a knot. She waited as the 10 minutes stretched into 15, then 20. The conductor called for final boarding. Passengers climbed back onto the train. The rancher tipped his hat to her as he passed, curiosity flickering in his weathered face, but he didn't speak. And then she saw him. A young man, no, a boy really, perhaps 16, was hurrying across the dusty street toward the depot. He wore a telegram messenger's cap and carried a yellow envelope in his hand. His eyes found Clara immediately, as if he'd been looking for someone matching her description. Miss Winthrop? He called, slightly out of breath. Hope and dread warred in Clara's chest. Yes? He thrust the telegram toward her. This came for you an hour ago. Was supposed to be delivered to the previous station, but the lines were down. I'm real sorry, miss. Clara's hand shook as she took the envelope. The boy shifted uncomfortably, then turned and hurried away before she could even think to tip him. Behind her, the train whistle screamed again, the final warning. She tore open the envelope. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning sank into her bones like ice water. Clara. Stop. Situation changed. Stop. Remarried last month. Stop. Wife does not want you here. Stop. Do not come. Stop. Father. For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The train's wheels began to turn, slowly at first, then gathering speed. The westbound engine, the one that would continue on to California, to opportunities she'd heard whispered about in boarding houses, pulled away from the station, taking with it her last chance to run somewhere, anywhere else. She was stranded, in a town where she knew no one, with $3 in her reticule, a father who didn't want her, and absolutely nowhere to go. The platform emptied quickly. The rancher drove his wagon away. The 2 women disappeared into a general store across the street. The Mexican family had boarded the train. Clara stood alone in the settling dust, the telegram still clutched in her hand, trying to understand how her life had come to this. 15 years ago, her father had kissed her forehead and promised he'd send for them as soon as he struck it rich. Her mother had believed him, had waited, had defended him even as months turned to years, and his letters became less frequent, then stopped altogether. She'd died still believing he loved them, still clutching the last letter he'd sent, a brief note about a promising claim and hard winters. Clara had been 10 years old when her mother died. She'd spent the next 8 years in a boarding school funded by her maternal aunt's reluctant charity, learning to be a proper young lady while trying to forget she had a father at all. But when the money ran out and her aunt made it clear that Clara's welcome had expired, she'd had no choice but to reach out to the man who'd abandoned them. And he'd said yes. He'd actually said yes. Until today. Clara looked down at the telegram again, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. "Wife does not want you here. Not even, I don't want you here." He'd blamed it on his new wife, this woman Clara had never met, who'd somehow convinced her father that his own daughter wasn't worth the inconvenience. A bitter laugh escaped her throat. She'd been such a fool. The sun beat down mercilessly. Clara's corset felt like an iron cage around her ribs. She needed to move, to think, to plan, but her mind felt numb, frozen by the enormity of her situation. $3 wouldn't even buy a return ticket partway to Boston. And what waited for her there anyway? The boarding school had closed. Her aunt had made her feelings clear. Her mother's friends had scattered or forgotten her. She was completely, utterly alone. Clara picked up her valise and began walking. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Away from the depot, away from the pitying stares she imagined following her, away from the last shred of hope she'd been clinging to. Silver Creek wasn't much of a town. The main street stretched perhaps a quarter mile, lined with the usual frontier establishments: a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a sheriff's office, a church with a modest steeple. Beyond the buildings, the landscape opened into endless scrubland dotted with sagebrush and mesquite, with mountains rising purple and distant on the horizon. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and Clara hated it with every fiber of her being. She made it perhaps 200 yards past the last building before her legs began to shake. The heat, the shock, the weight of her dress and corset, it all crashed down on her at once. She stumbled, caught herself, and looked around wildly for somewhere to sit, somewhere to think. There was nothing, just endless desert stretching in every direction. Clara set down her valise and pressed her hands to her face, finally allowing the tears to come. They fell hot and fast, leaving tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She cried for her mother, for the father she'd never really known, for the life she'd imagined and lost in the span of a single telegram. "Miss Winthrop," the voice came from behind her, deep, calm, with a slight western drawl that spoke of years under open skies. Clara spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the derringer hidden in her pocket. Her fingers found the cool metal of the grip. The man standing 10 feet away raised his hand slowly, palms out. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark vest and white shirt. A silver star was pinned to his chest, catching the sunlight. His face was weathered but handsome, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention. Gray as storm clouds, steady and knowing, with a depth of sadness that seemed to mirror her own. "How do you know my name?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking. Her fingers tightened on the derringer. "Your father told me you'd be arriving today," the man said quietly. He didn't move closer, didn't make any threatening gestures. "I'm Reed Callahan, sheriff of Silver Creek." Clara's laugh was harsh, bitter. "Then I suppose he also told you not to expect me, that his new wife doesn't want me here?" Something flickered across Reed Callahan's face. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition. "I received a telegram this morning from Charles Winthrop, asking me to meet you at the depot and explain the situation." "Explain?" Clara's voice rose despite herself. "What's there to explain? He doesn't want me. His letter made that perfectly clear, so you can tell them, that I won't be a burden. I'll find my own way." She turned to pick up her valise, though she had no idea where she planned to go. Her vision swam with tears and heat and exhaustion. "Miss Winthrop," Reed's voice was gentle but firm. "It's 104 degrees in the shade right now. You've been traveling for weeks. You're exhausted, and if I'm not mistaken, you don't have the funds to go anywhere else." Clara froze. "How dare you?" Your father mentioned your circumstances, Reed continued, and now there was something harder in his tone. He also mentioned that he was sending you here under false pretenses, that he'd promised to take you in, then changed his mind without having the courage to tell you himself. Clara turned back to face him, anger replacing despair. And you think that gives you the right to… what? Pity me? Offer me charity? I think, Reed said slowly, that you deserve better than to collapse from heat exhaustion in the desert because your father's a coward. The blunt words hit Clara like a slap. For a moment, she could only stare at him. Reed lowered his hands, though he still didn't approach. There's a boarding house in town. Mrs. Hartley runs it. She's a good woman, fair and honest. She needs help with the cooking and cleaning, and she'll give you room and board in exchange for work. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I don't need your help, Clara said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Maybe not, Reed agreed, but you do need a place to sleep tonight, and some food in your belly, and time to figure out what comes next. Will you accept that much, at least? Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to throw his offer back in his face and walk away with her pride intact. But pride wouldn't buy her a meal. Pride wouldn't give her shelter when the sun went down and the desert cold set in. And something in Reed Callahan's steady gaze told her that he understood exactly what she was feeling. The humiliation, the fear, the desperate need to maintain some shred of dignity in the face of utter ruin. One night, she heard herself say, I'll stay one night, and then I'll find my own way. Reed nodded, and Clara could have sworn she saw relief in his eyes. That's all I'm asking. He stepped forward and picked up her valise before she could protest. Mrs. Hartley's place is just up the street. She's expecting you. Clara fell into step beside him, keeping a careful distance. Her hand remained in her pocket, fingers still touching the derringer. She might be desperate, but she wasn't stupid. They walked in silence for a few moments. Clara used the time to study Silver Creek more carefully. Up close, it was rougher than it had appeared from the depot. The buildings weathered by sun and wind, the streets deeply rutted from wagon wheels and horses' hooves. But there was a sense of order to it, a feeling that despite its frontier roughness, this was a community that took care of its own. Your father lives about 2 miles outside of town, Reed said suddenly, breaking the silence. He and his new wife, Elizabeth, run a small ranch. Cattle, mostly. I don't care, Clara said flatly. Reed glanced at her. He wanted me to tell you. I said I don't care. Clara's voice was sharp. Whatever excuse he has, whatever justification, I don't want to hear it. He made his choice, and I've made mine. Reed was quiet for a moment. And what choice is that? To survive, Clara said simply. To find a way forward that doesn't depend on anyone who's already proven they can't be depended on. She felt Reed's eyes on her, but when she glanced over, his expression was unreadable. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. It was modest but well-maintained, with flower boxes under the windows and a hand-painted sign that read, Hartley's Lodging House. Clean rooms, fair prices. Reed climbed the porch steps and knocked on the door. Within moments, it swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and shrewd blue eyes that immediately assessed Clara from head to toe. Mrs. Hartley, Reed said, this is Miss Clara Winthrop. I can see that. Mrs. Hartley's voice was brisk but not unkind. Come in, girl, before you faint on my porch. You look like you've been through the ringer. Clara bristled at being called a girl. She was 18, a woman grown, but she was too tired to argue. She climbed the steps and followed Mrs. Hartley inside. The interior was blessedly cool and surprisingly cheerful. Polished wooden floors, simple but sturdy furniture, and the smell of bread baking somewhere in the back. Through an open doorway, Clara could see a dining room with several tables already set for supper. Reed tells me you need work, Mrs. Hartley said, turning to face Clara with her hands on her hips. I need help with the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and managing the guests. It's hard work. I won't lie to you about that. But you'll get your own room, 3 meals a day, and a small wage besides. Enough to save up for a train ticket if that's what you're after. Clara swallowed hard. What's the catch? Mrs. Hartley's eyebrows rose. Catch? In my experience, Clara said quietly, Nothing comes without strings attached. For the first time, Mrs. Hartley's stern expression softened slightly. The only string is that you work hard and deal honestly with me and my guests. I run a respectable establishment, Miss Winthrop. I don't tolerate laziness, theft, or impropriety. But I also don't tolerate anyone taking advantage of my girls. You'll be safe here, fed here, and treated fairly here. That's my word, and in Silver Creek, my word means something. Clara looked between Mrs. Hartley and Reed, searching for deception or hidden motives, but all she saw was honest concern and perhaps a touch of pity she desperately didn't want. I accept, she said finally. Thank you. Mrs. Hartley nodded briskly. Good. Reed, you can go now. Miss Winthrop needs to wash up and rest before supper, and I imagine she'd like some privacy. Reed set Clara's valise down just inside the door. Of course. He touched the brim of his hat, looking at Clara. If you need anything, Miss Winthrop, the sheriff's office is just down the street. Don't hesitate. Clara nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as Reed left, his footsteps heavy on the porch, then fading into the street. He's a good man, Mrs. Hartley said quietly. Lost his wife and baby daughter to fever 3 years back. Hasn't been quite the same since, but he takes care of this town like it's his own family. Clara said nothing. She didn't want to hear about Reed Callahan's losses or his goodness. She didn't want to feel anything for anyone in this God-forsaken town. Mrs. Hartley seemed to understand. Come on then, I'll show you your room. She led Clara up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dim but clean, with doors on either side. Mrs. Hartley stopped at the last door on the left and pushed it open. The room was small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, washstand, and trunk that occupied it. But it had a window that looked out over the street, and the bed was made up with clean white linens. After weeks of sleeping on trains and in questionable hotels, it looked like heaven. Wash basins there, Mrs. Hartley said, pointing to the stand. I'll have one of the girls bring up hot water in a bit. Supper's at 6. We eat family style in the dining room, guests and staff together. You can join us or not, as you please, but I'd recommend it. Good way to get to know folks. Clara nodded, still taking in the space. Her space, at least for now. Thank you, she managed to say. Truly, I appreciate this. Mrs. Hartley's expression softened completely. You've had a hard day, child. Get some rest. Things will look different after you've slept and eaten. She paused in the doorway. And Miss Winthrop, whatever brought you to Silver Creek, whatever you're running from or toward, you're safe here. Remember that. Then she was gone, pulling the door closed behind her with a soft click. Clara stood in the center of the small room for a long moment, the telegram still clutched in one hand. Then, slowly, deliberately, she walked to the window and looked out at the dusty street below. Silver Creek, the middle of nowhere. The last place on earth she wanted to be. But at least she had a roof over her head and a chance to catch her breath. That was more than she'd had an hour ago. Clara pulled the derringer from her pocket and set it carefully on the washstand. Then she sat down on the bed, removed her traveling hat, and let herself collapse backward onto the clean white pillow. Tomorrow she would figure out what came next. Tomorrow she would make a plan, find a way forward, start rebuilding her shattered life. But tonight, she would simply exist in this small, safe room and try not to think about how completely alone she was. The knock on the door came 2 hours later, just as the evening light was turning golden through the window. Clara had dozed fitfully, her corset making it impossible to truly rest, but she'd been too emotionally exhausted to care. Miss Winthrop, a young woman's voice, bright and friendly. I've brought your hot water. Clara sat up, smoothing her hair as best she could. Come in. The door opened to reveal a girl about Clara's age with dark hair pinned up under a simple cap and warm brown eyes. She carried a large pitcher of steaming water. I'm Sarah. I help Mrs. Hartley with the guests. She poured the water into the basin, then turned with a smile. She wanted me to tell you that supper's in 20 minutes if you're feeling up to it. Clara glanced at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked terrible, hair disheveled, face streaked with dust and dried tears, dress wrinkled beyond recognition. I'm not fit to be seen, she said quietly. Sarah's smile was sympathetic. We've all had those days. Trust me, nobody here will judge you. But if you'd rather, I can bring a tray up to your room? The offer was tempting. Clara desperately wanted to hide in this small room and avoid facing anyone. But Mrs. Hartley's words echoed in her mind. Good way to get to know folks, and whether Clara liked it or not, she was going to be in Silver Creek for at least a little while. She might as well start meeting the people who would be part of her temporary world. I'll come down, she decided. Just give me a few minutes to make myself presentable. Take your time. Sarah headed for the door, then paused. And Miss Winthrop, I just want to say, I'm glad you're here. Mrs. Hartley's been running herself ragged trying to keep up with everything. It'll be nice to have another pair of hands and another woman around our age to talk to. She left before Clara could respond, leaving Clara staring after her with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been the first tiny flicker of hope. Clara washed quickly, relishing the feel of hot water on her dusty skin. She changed into her other dress, a simple gray cotton that wouldn't raise eyebrows in a boarding house, and did her best to pin her hair into a respectable bun. The face that looked back at her from the mirror was still pale and drawn, but at least she looked like a proper young woman rather than a wild-eyed refugee. The derringer caught her eye. Clara hesitated, then tucked it into the hidden pocket she'd sewn into her skirt. Just in case. The stairs creaked under her feet as she descended. Voices and laughter drifted from the dining room, along with the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread. Clara's stomach growled, reminding her that she'd barely eaten all day. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. 3 long tables were arranged in the room, with perhaps 15 people already seated, a mix of men and women of various ages. Mrs. Hartley presided at the head of the center table, with Sarah helping to serve bowls of stew from a large tureen. Mrs. Hartley spotted Clara immediately. Miss Winthrop, come, sit. There's plenty. Clara made her way to an empty seat near the end of one table, acutely aware of the curious glances following her. She kept her eyes down, folding her hands in her lap. Everyone, Mrs. Hartley announced, this is Miss Clara Winthrop from Boston. She'll be helping me run the boarding house from now on. I expect you all to make her feel welcome. A chorus of friendly greetings followed. Clara managed a small smile and a nod, but said nothing. Sarah placed a bowl of stew in front of her, along with a thick slice of bread. Eat up, she whispered. Mrs. Hartley's stew is the best in the territory. The first bite was like heaven. Rich beef and vegetables in a savory broth, perfectly seasoned and piping hot. Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food hit her stomach. She ate slowly, trying to maintain some semblance of manners while desperately wanting to devour everything in front of her. So, you're from Boston? The woman sitting across from Clara was perhaps 30, with kind eyes and a worn face that spoke of hard work. That's a long way to come. Yes, Clara said quietly. A very long way. What brings you to Silver Creek? The question was innocent enough, but Clara felt herself tense. Family, she said shortly, hoping that would end the conversation. It didn't. Oh? Do you have relatives here? Before Clara could figure out how to answer without revealing the humiliating truth, Mrs. Hartley's voice cut across the table. Miss Winthrop's personal business is her own, Martha. Let the girl eat in peace. Martha looked chastened. Of course, I didn't mean to pry. The conversation shifted to other topics. The upcoming church social, the state of the cattle market, speculation about whether the railroad would extend a spur to Silver Creek. Clara ate and listened, learning the rhythms of this small frontier community. She was just finishing her stew when the front door opened and Sheriff Callahan entered. He removed his hat, his eyes scanning the room until they found Clara. Mrs. Hartley stood immediately. Reed, I wasn't expecting you. Are you joining us for supper? Already ate, Reed said, but his attention remained on Clara. I was actually hoping to have a word with Miss Winthrop, if she's willing. Every eye in the room turned to Clara. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm eating, she said stiffly. It can wait until you're finished, Reed said calmly. I'll be on the porch. He left as quietly as he'd come, leaving Clara acutely aware of the speculative looks being exchanged around the table. The sheriff's taken quite an interest in you, Martha observed with a meaningful tone. He's just doing his job, Mrs. Hartley said firmly. Making sure our newest resident is settling in properly. Nothing more. But the knowing looks didn't fade, and Clara felt a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. She hadn't even been in town for 4 hours, and already people were gossiping. She finished her meal as quickly as she could without appearing rude, then excused herself and made her way to the front porch. Reed stood leaning against the railing, looking out at the street as evening shadows lengthened. He straightened when Clara appeared. "I'm sorry to interrupt your supper," he said, "but I thought you'd want to know. Your father came by the sheriff's office this afternoon." Clara's entire body went rigid. What did he want? To explain himself, I suspect, or maybe to ease his conscience. Reed's voice was carefully neutral. "I told him you'd arrived safely and were staying at Mrs. Hartley's. He asked if he could come see you." "No." The word came out sharp and immediate. "I don't want to see him. I don't want his explanations or his excuses." Reed nodded slowly. "That's what I told him you'd say. He left this for you anyway." He held out an envelope. Clara stared at it like it was a snake. "I don't want it," she said. "It's yours, regardless." Reed set it on the porch railing between them. "What you do with it is your choice." Clara looked at the envelope, then at Reed. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to me?" Reed was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes studying her face. "Because I know what it's like to have your life torn apart," he said finally, "to lose everything you thought was solid and true, and I know how hard it is to rebuild from nothing." "Mrs. Hartley told me about your wife," Clara said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." Something flickered across Reed's face, old pain, carefully controlled. "Thank you. It was 3 years ago, but some days it feels like yesterday." He paused. "But I learned something from it. When you've lost everything, the smallest kindness can make the difference between giving up and going on. So if I can offer that kindness to someone else who's lost and hurting, well, it seems like the least I can do." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. She blinked them back fiercely. "I'm not lost," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Reed agreed. "But you're hurt, and you're alone, and I'm just trying to make sure you know that you don't have to stay that way." He touched his hat and turned to leave. "Good night, Miss Winthrop. Welcome to Silver Creek." Clara watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the gathering dusk. Then she looked down at the envelope on the railing. Her father's handwriting. She recognized it from the handful of letters he'd sent when she was young, before he'd stopped writing altogether. Her hand hovered over it. Part of her wanted to tear it open, to read whatever justification or apology he'd written. Another part wanted to toss it into the street and never think about it again. In the end, she picked it up and carried it back to her room, unopened. She tucked it into her valise beneath her mother's Bible and tried to pretend it didn't exist. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. But tonight Clara just wanted to sleep. She undressed carefully, hung her dress on the hook behind the door, and climbed into the narrow bed in her chemise. The mattress was lumpy but clean, and the sheet smelled of lavender. Through the window she could hear the sounds of Silver Creek settling in for the night, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, a woman calling her children home, the faint sound of a piano from the saloon down the street. Clara closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her mother would say if she could see her now. Stranded in an Arizona town, working as a hired girl in a boarding house with nothing but $3 and a father who didn't want her. But somehow, despite everything, she was safe, fed, sheltered. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had this morning. And as sleep finally claimed her, Clara made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would find a way forward, and she would never, ever depend on anyone else for her happiness again. Clara woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. The narrow bed, the unfamiliar ceiling, the harsh sunlight streaming through thin curtains all felt wrong. Then memory crashed back, and with it, the hollow ache in her chest that had become her constant companion. She sat up slowly, her body protesting. The train journey had left her sore and stiff, and sleeping in a corset, something she'd been too exhausted to remove last night, had only made things worse. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a pale, drawn face with shadows under her eyes. A knock on the door made her jump. "Miss Winthrop?" Sarah's cheerful voice called. Mrs. Hartley says breakfast is in 15 minutes, and then she'll show you your duties for the day. I'll be down shortly, Clara managed to call back. She dressed quickly in the gray cotton dress, pinned up her hair, and splashed water on her face from the basin. The derringer went back into its hidden pocket, a precaution that was becoming habit. Then she made her way downstairs, following the sounds and smells of breakfast preparation. The kitchen was a hive of activity. Mrs. Hartley stood at the stove flipping flapjacks on a griddle while Sarah set plates and cups on a large tray. Another woman Clara hadn't met, older with graying hair and a pronounced limp, was slicing bread at a worn wooden table. "Good morning," Mrs. Hartley said briskly, not looking up from her work. "You'll find coffee in the pot. Help yourself, then come over here. I want to show you how I like the flapjacks done." Clara poured herself a cup of strong black coffee and approached the stove. Mrs. Hartley pointed with her spatula. "See how the edges are just starting to brown? That's when you flip them. Too early, and they're gummy. Too late, and they're tough. You want them golden and fluffy." For the next hour, Clara learned the morning routine of Hartley's lodging house. The flapjacks were served with bacon and eggs, all cooked to specific standards that Mrs. Hartley insisted upon. The dining room had to be set just so. Forks on the left, knives on the right, napkins folded into triangles. Coffee cups filled exactly 3/4 full, never more or less. "I run a respectable establishment," Mrs. Hartley repeated as she showed Clara how to arrange the serving bowls. "That means attention to detail. My guests pay good money for clean rooms and decent food. And by God, that's what they'll get." The boarders began filing in around 7, the same faces from last night, plus a few Clara hadn't seen. They ate quickly and efficiently, men heading off to work at the mines or ranches, women to shops or homes where they were employed. Within 30 minutes, the dining room was empty again. Then the real work began. Clara had thought she knew what hard work meant. She'd scrubbed floors at the boarding school, helped in the kitchen, done her share of mending and laundry. But Mrs. Hartley's standards were exacting, and the volume of work was staggering. First came clearing and washing the breakfast dishes, 3 full sinks worth. Then the beds in all 12 guest rooms had to be stripped, the linen sorted for washing, the mattresses turned and aired. Windows needed washing, floors needed sweeping and mopping, chamber pots needed emptying and cleaning. By noon, Clara's hands were red and raw, her back ached fiercely, and sweat had soaked through her dress despite the relative coolness of the morning. She'd barely paused to catch her breath when Mrs. Hartley appeared with a basket of vegetables. "Lunch is at 1, she announced. "You'll need to peel these potatoes and carrots, then help Sarah with the chicken. And don't forget to pump fresh water for the pitchers in each room." Clara wanted to collapse. Instead, she took the basket and got to work. It was during lunch preparation that she met Anna Pierce, the woman who would become her first real friend in Silver Creek. Anna arrived at the kitchen door just as Clara was struggling to pluck a stubborn chicken. She was perhaps 25, with intelligent hazel eyes, honey-colored hair pinned in a simple but elegant style, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from education and self-possession. "Mrs. Hartley," she called through the screen door, "I've come to borrow your big roasting pan for the church social on Saturday. Is this a good time?" Come in, Mrs. Hartley said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You remember Sarah, and this is our new girl, Clara Winthrop. Clara, this is Miss Anna Pierce. She teaches at the schoolhouse." Anna's eyes lit with interest as she stepped inside. "Miss Winthrop, I heard you'd arrived. How are you settling in?" Clara looked down at her filthy apron, her reddened hands, the half-plucked chicken in front of her. "As well as can be expected," she said dryly. Anna laughed, a genuine warm sound. "Mrs. Hartley works her girls hard, but fairly. You'll get used to it." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "And between you and me, the work is exhausting but honest, better than some alternatives available to women in frontier towns." There was understanding in Anna's eyes, and Clara felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Here was someone who seemed to truly comprehend what it meant to be a woman alone, making her own way. "I'm managing," Clara said softly. "I'm sure you are." Anna glanced at Mrs. Hartley, who was rummaging in a cabinet for the roasting pan. "Listen, I teach reading and arithmetic to the children 3 days a week at the schoolhouse, but on Thursday evenings, I hold a gathering for the women in town. We read together, discuss books, practice our needlework. It's informal, just a chance to socialize and improve our minds. Would you like to join us? Clara hesitated. The idea of sitting in a circle with strangers, making small talk and pretending everything was fine, made her stomach clench. I'm not sure I'd fit in. Nonsense, Anna said firmly. You're from Boston. I'm sure you're far better educated than most of us. And honestly, it would be refreshing to have someone new to talk to. Most of us have been having the same conversations for years. I'll think about it, Clara said, not wanting to commit. Anna smiled as if she'd won a victory. Excellent. We meet at 7 on Thursdays in the back room of the church. I do hope you'll come. She accepted the roasting pan from Mrs. Hartley with thanks and headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Miss Winthrop, welcome to Silver Creek. I think you'll find we're not as rough as we appear. After she left, Sarah leaned over and whispered, Miss Pierce is wonderful. She taught me to read properly when I first came to town. You should go to her gathering. It's the highlight of my week. Clara returned to her chicken, saying nothing, but she found herself thinking about Anna Pierce's invitation more than she wanted to admit. The afternoon brought more chores, laundry that needed scrubbing, mending that needed doing, dinner preparations that seemed endless. Claire's entire body screamed in protest, but she pushed through, determined not to show weakness. Mrs. Hartley had given her a chance when no one else would. The least she could do was prove she wasn't afraid of hard work. It was nearly 5 o'clock when she finally had a moment to step outside for fresh air. She stood on the back porch, rubbing her aching shoulders and looking out at the dusty yard where laundry lines stretched between posts. You're going to hurt yourself if you keep pushing that hard. Clara spun around to find Sheriff Callahan standing at the corner of the house, his hat in his hands. She instinctively touched the pocket where her derringer rested. Reed raised an eyebrow. Still don't trust me? I don't trust anyone, Clara said flatly. Fair enough. He climbed the porch steps slowly, giving her plenty of space. I came to check on you, make sure you're settling in all right. As you can see, I'm fine. Clara gestured at her filthy dress, her reddened hands. Mrs. Hartley keeps me busy enough that I don't have time to think about anything else. That's probably for the best, Reed said quietly. He leaned against the porch railing, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Have you given any thought to what you want to do long term? Clara stiffened. I've been here less than a day, Sheriff. I think I'm entitled to at least a week before making life-altering decisions. I'm not rushing you, Reed said. I'm just saying, Geese, you have options, Miss Winthrop. You're young, educated, clearly capable. This territory has opportunities for women who are willing to work. Opportunities? Clara laughed bitterly. What opportunities? To marry some rough rancher who needs a cook and a broodmare? To work myself to death in a boarding house? To become... She stopped herself, but Reed's expression told her he knew exactly what she'd been about to say. There are worse fates, he said evenly. And better ones, too. Anna Pierce came here 5 years ago with nothing but a teaching certificate and $50. Now she owns her own house, runs the school, and has the respect of the entire community. Sarah started as an orphan working in a saloon. Mrs. Hartley gave her a chance, and now she's learning a trade that'll serve her anywhere. And you think I'll find my happy ending in Silver Creek, too? Claire's voice was sharp with sarcasm. Reed studied her for a long moment. I think you're angry and hurt and scared. And I think you're taking that out on everyone around you, including the people who are trying to help. The words hit harder than Clara expected. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. Reed pushed away from the railing. I know your mother died and left you alone. I know your father abandoned you twice, once when you were a child, and again yesterday. I know you're smart and proud and so terrified of depending on anyone that you'd rather walk into the desert than accept kindness. Clara's hands clenched into fists. Get out! This is Mrs. Hartley's property, not yours, Reed pointed out calmly. But I'll go. Just remember, being strong doesn't mean being alone, and accepting help doesn't make you weak. He settled his hat on his head and walked away, leaving Clara trembling with anger and something else she didn't want to name. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Clara finally opened her father's letter. The envelope was thick, containing several pages in her father's cramped handwriting. Clara's hands shook as she unfolded them and began to read by the light of her small lamp. Dear Clara, it began, I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness. But I need you to understand why things turned out the way they did." He went on to explain his struggles in the early years, the failed claims, the debts that piled up. He'd meant to send for her and her mother once he got established, but the money never came. The big strike never happened. Years passed, and shame kept him from writing, from admitting failure. Then he met Elizabeth, a widow with her own small ranch. They'd married quickly, and for the first time in years, he'd had stability. A home, a second chance. "When your mother's lawyer contacted me about her death, I should have come for you immediately," he wrote, "but I was a coward. I convinced myself you were better off in school, better off without a father who'd failed you so completely. It wasn't until Elizabeth found out about you that I realized I couldn't keep hiding." The next part made Clara's chest tight. "Elizabeth wanted to meet you. She pushed me to bring you here. But then her sister arrived with her children. They'd lost everything in a fire back in Texas. And suddenly our small house was full. Elizabeth panicked. She said we couldn't afford another mouth to feed, couldn't handle any more responsibility. We fought about it for weeks. In the end, I chose her. I chose the life I'd built over the daughter I'd abandoned, and I will carry that shame for the rest of my life." The letter concluded with an explanation of the inheritance Clara had mentioned in her last correspondence. Money from her maternal grandmother, held in trust until Clara turned 18. Her father had managed to track it down through the lawyer. "It's not much," he wrote, "but it's yours. $500. Enough to start over somewhere, if that's what you want. Enough to make choices. I've already contacted the bank in Silver Creek to have the funds transferred to an account in your name. Consider it my final failure, giving you money instead of the father you deserved." He signed it simply, Charles Winthrop. Clara read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just felt empty. $500. A fortune for a girl with nothing. The price of her father's guilt. She could leave Silver Creek tomorrow if she wanted. Buy a ticket to San Francisco or Denver or anywhere else that promised opportunity. She could start completely fresh, where no one knew her story or her shame. But something held her back. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the unexpected kindness of people like Mrs. Hartley and Anna Pierce. Or maybe it was the quiet certainty in Sheriff Callahan's eyes when he said she had options. Clara extinguished her lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. Tomorrow would bring more work, more aching muscles, more reminders of how far she'd fallen. But it would also bring choices. And for the first time in her life, those choices would be entirely her own. The week that followed established a rhythm that was both grueling and oddly comforting. Clara rose before dawn, helped prepare breakfast, cleaned rooms, washed laundry, assisted with lunch and dinner, and fell into bed each night too exhausted to think. Her hands developed calluses, her back grew stronger, and slowly, grudgingly, she began to take a kind of pride in her work. Mrs. Hartley was demanding but never cruel. When Clara burned a batch of biscuits, the older woman simply showed her how to adjust the oven temperature. When Clara's bed-making didn't meet standards, Mrs. Hartley demonstrated the proper hospital corners and had her practice until she got it right. "You're a quick learner," Mrs. Hartley observed on the 4th day, watching Clara expertly fold sheets. "That Boston education of yours is showing through." Clara felt a flush of pleasure at the praise, though she tried to hide it. Sarah proved to be a cheerful companion, chattering about town gossip as they worked side by side. Clara learned that the banker's wife was expecting her 5th child, that the saloon owner had gotten into a fist fight with a card cheat, that the rancher's son had proposed to the general store owner's daughter and been turned down flat. "You'll meet everyone at the church social on Saturday," Sarah said excitedly as they hung laundry on Thursday afternoon. "There'll be music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Mrs. Hartley always makes her famous apple pie." I'm not much for socializing," Clara said carefully. "Oh, you have to come." Sarah's face fell. "Everyone will be there. It's the biggest event of the month, and Miss Pierce specifically asked me to make sure you knew you were invited." Clara had been avoiding thinking about Anna Pierce's Thursday evening gathering, which was happening that very night. She'd planned to plead exhaustion and stay in her room, but Sarah's eager face and genuine kindness made her hesitate. "I don't know," she said slowly. "Please?" Sarah clasped her hands together. I promise it's not intimidating. We just sit and talk, and sometimes Miss Pierce reads to us from novels. Last week we discussed Jane Eyre. Do you know it? Clara's heart gave a small leap. I've read it. Several times, actually. Then you have to come. Miss Pierce will be thrilled to have someone who can actually discuss the literary themes. Most of us just like the romance parts. Sarah grinned. Please, Clara, I'll feel so much braver if you're there with me. And so, at 6:45 that evening, Clara found herself walking to the church alongside Sarah, carrying the mending she'd been working on. She'd changed into her better dress, the dark blue one with modest trim, and pinned her hair carefully. Despite her determination to remain aloof, she found herself nervous about making a good impression. The church was a simple white building with a small steeple, located at the far end of the main street. Sarah led Clara around to the back entrance, where light spilled from a side room and the murmur of female voices could be heard. Inside, perhaps a dozen women sat in a loose circle, ranging in age from teenage to elderly. Anna Pierce stood at the front, arranging books on a small table. She looked up as Clara and Sarah entered, and her face brightened. Miss Winthrop, I'm so glad you came. Anna gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit. We're just getting started. Clara took the offered seat, acutely aware of the curious glances from the other women. Sarah settled beside her and immediately began introducing her to the group. There was Martha, the woman from the boarding house who'd asked prying questions at dinner. Beside her sat two younger women, sisters, apparently, who worked at the general store. An elderly woman with sharp eyes occupied the chair near the window, her gnarled hands flying over knitting needles. Three Mexican women sat together, chatting quietly in Spanish. Ladies, Anna called the group to order. As you can see, we have a new member tonight. Miss Clara Winthrop has recently arrived from Boston and is working at Mrs. Hartley's boarding house. Clara, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself? Clara's throat went dry. Every eye was on her, waiting. There's not much to tell. I came west seeking family connections that didn't work out. Mrs. Hartley kindly gave me employment. It was a careful half-truth that revealed nothing of substance. Anna seemed to understand because she smoothly moved on. We're continuing our discussion of Jane Eyre tonight. Last week we left off with Jane's decision to leave Mr. Rochester after discovering his secret. I thought we might discuss whether her choice was brave or foolish. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Clara had expected. These frontier women, many of them with limited formal education, had surprisingly thoughtful opinions about Jane's moral dilemma, about duty versus desire, about what a woman owed herself versus what society demanded. Clara found herself drawn in despite her reservations. When Anna asked for her thoughts, she spoke carefully at first, then with growing confidence as the other women listened respectfully. I think Jane's choice was about maintaining her sense of self, Clara said. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, being made to feel small and unimportant. Mr. Rochester was the first person who made her feel valued, but staying with him under false pretenses would have destroyed the very thing he claimed to love, her integrity. Anna's eyes shone with approval. Exactly. She chose herself, even when it cost her everything she wanted. But she suffered for it, Martha pointed out. She wandered starving and homeless. Was that really better than staying where she was loved and comfortable? Sometimes suffering is the price of self-respect, Clara heard herself say. The words came from somewhere deep and raw, and she realized too late that she was talking about more than a fictional character. The room fell quiet. Anna's gaze was gentle but knowing. Indeed. And in the end, Jane's integrity is rewarded. She inherits money, finds family, and returns to Mr. Rochester on her own terms, as his equal, not his dependent. That's the fairy tale part, though, isn't it? One of the younger women said wistfully. In real life, women who walk away don't get happy endings. They just get more hardship. Sometimes, Anna agreed, but sometimes, if they're brave enough and strong enough, they create their own happy endings. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She hadn't expected this simple book discussion to cut so close to her own wounded heart. After the formal discussion ended, the women broke into smaller groups, working on various projects while chatting. Sarah introduced Clara to the Mexican women, Maria, Rosa, and Esperanza, who welcomed her warmly and insisted she try the sweetbread they'd brought to share. "Your English is beautiful," Maria said, her own accent thick but her meaning clear. "You could teach with Miss Pierce, no?" "I'm not a teacher," Clara protested. "You could be," Anna said, appearing beside them with cups of tea. "I'm desperately in need of help at the school. The children range from 5 to 14, and I can't possibly give them all the individual attention they need. If you have any interest in teaching, even just a few hours a week, I'd be grateful." Clara accepted the tea, considering. "I don't have any formal training." "Neither did I when I started," Anna said with a smile. "But you're educated, articulate, and clearly intelligent. That's more than enough. Think about it." Before Clara could respond, the elderly woman with the knitting needles spoke up from across the room. "Anna Pierce, stop trying to recruit everyone for your school. The girl's been here less than a week. Let her catch her breath." Anna laughed. "You're right, Mrs. Chen. I apologize, Clara. I tend to get overeager about education." "Mrs. Chen?" Clara repeated, startled by the name. The old woman's eyes twinkled. "My late husband was Chinese. I know, odd to find a Chinese-Irish woman in Arizona territory. But love doesn't much care about what's convenient." She fixed Clara with a penetrating stare. "You've got sadness in you, girl. Fresh wounds. Give them time to heal before making any big decisions." Clara found she couldn't look away from Mrs. Chen's knowing gaze. "How did you—" "I've been around long enough to recognize heartbreak," Mrs. Chen said simply, "and long enough to know it passes, if you let it." The evening concluded with Anna reading aloud from a new novel she'd ordered, Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Her voice was expressive and engaging, and Clara found herself transported to London and exotic locales, forgetting for a blessed hour about her own troubles. As the women gathered their things to leave, Anna pulled Clara aside. "I meant what I said about the teaching position. No pressure, but if you're interested, come by the schoolhouse tomorrow afternoon. I'll show you around and you can see if it might suit you." Clara nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." Walking back to the boarding house with Sarah, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Boston, a sense of belonging, however tentative. These women had welcomed her without prying into her painful history. They'd treated her as an equal, valued her thoughts, offered her opportunities. "Did you enjoy it?" Sarah asked hopefully. "I did," Clara admitted. "More than I expected to," Sarah beamed. "I knew you would. Miss Pierce has that effect on people. She makes you feel like you matter, like your thoughts are worth hearing." She squeezed Clara's arm. "I'm so glad you came. Will you come to the church social on Saturday too?" Clara found herself smiling, a real smile, perhaps the first since she'd arrived in Silver Creek. "Yes," she said, "I think I will." That night, instead of collapsing into immediate sleep, Clara sat at the small table in her room and wrote a letter. Not to her father, she wasn't ready for that, but to her mother's memory, pouring out everything she'd been holding inside. The betrayal, the fear, the unexpected kindness of strangers, the tiny shoots of hope trying to take root in her wounded heart. She ended the letter with a promise. "I will make you proud, Mama. I will build a life worth living. I will prove that your sacrifice wasn't in vain." Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her Bible, next to her father's letter. Two pieces of her past, preserved but not controlling her future. The next afternoon, after her morning chores were complete, Clara walked to the schoolhouse. It was a modest one-room building on the edge of town, with glass windows and a small bell tower. Anna was sweeping the front steps when Clara arrived. "You came!" Anna set aside her broom, eyes bright with pleasure. "Come in. Let me show you around." The interior was simple but well organized. Rows of wooden desks faced a blackboard at the front. Shelves along one wall held books and supplies. Sunshine streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "I have 18 students currently," Anna explained, walking Clara through the space. "The youngest is 5, just learning his letters. The oldest is 14 and preparing to test for higher education. Most fall somewhere in between, basic reading, writing, and arithmetic." She showed Clara the curriculum she used, the primers and readers, the slate boards for practice. "I try to teach in small groups organized by skill level, but it's challenging. While I'm working with one group, the others are supposed to be doing independent work, but she laughed ruefully. Well, children being children, they often get distracted. How can I help? Clara found herself asking. Anna's face lit up. Could you work with the younger children on their letters and numbers? Even just 2 or 3 afternoons a week would make an enormous difference. I could pay you a small wage. It wouldn't be much, but combined with your earnings from Mrs. Hartley, Clara did quick calculations. Between the boarding house wages, teaching money, and her inheritance sitting in the bank, she could actually save enough to have real choices. Independence. Security. I'll do it, she said. When can I start? Monday, Anna suggested hopefully. The children will be thrilled to have a new teacher. They shook hands, and Clara felt a strange sense of possibility opening before her. This wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the future she'd imagined, but it was something, a foundation she was building herself, with her own hands and mind. Walking back to the boarding house, Clara passed the sheriff's office. Reed Callahan stood outside, talking to an older rancher. He glanced up as she approached, and their eyes met. Clara found herself pausing. Sheriff Callahan? Miss Winthrop. He excused himself from the rancher and walked over to her. You look different. Less like you want to shoot someone. Despite herself, Clara felt her lips twitch. I've had a productive day. Miss Pierce offered me a teaching position at the school. Reed's eyebrows rose. And you accepted? I did. Clara tilted her chin up. You were right. I do have options. I'm choosing to stay in Silver Creek, at least for now. To work, to save money, to build something for myself. Something shifted in Reed's expression. Respect, maybe, or approval. I'm glad to hear it. This town could use more people like you. People like me? Clara repeated skeptically. People with backbone, Reed said simply. People who don't give up when life knocks them down. People who fight their way back up and keep going. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm just doing what I have to do to survive. That's exactly what I mean. Reed's gray eyes held hers. Survival takes courage, Miss Winthrop. More courage than most people have. Don't sell yourself short. He touched his hat and returned to the rancher, leaving Clara standing on the dusty street, her heart doing strange things in her chest. She was still thinking about his words that evening as she helped serve dinner at the boarding house. Still thinking about them as she lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of Silver Creek settling into darkness. Sheriff Reed Callahan saw something in her that she didn't see in herself, and despite her best efforts to remain detached and guarded, that recognition warmed something cold and frightened deep inside her. Clara closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to truly belong here. To build a life in this rough frontier town, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was rather than who her family had been. The thought terrified her, but it also, for the first time since her mother's death, gave her something that felt dangerously close to hope. The church social arrived with unseasonably warm weather and a buzz of excitement that swept through Silver Creek like wildfire. Clara had never seen the boarding house in such upheaval. Every woman in residence spent hours preparing, pressing their best dresses, curling their hair, debating which ribbons matched which bonnets. Even Mrs. Hartley, who normally maintained strict practicality, pinned a cameo brooch to her collar and allowed Sarah to arrange her gray hair in a softer style. Clara stood before her small mirror that Saturday afternoon, critically examining her reflection. She'd chosen her mother's dress, the deep green silk that had been saved for special occasions, carefully preserved through all their hardships. It was slightly out of fashion now, the sleeves a bit fuller than current styles dictated, but the color brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes, and the fabric still had a lustrous quality that spoke of better days. You look beautiful, Sarah breathed from the doorway, where she'd been watching Clara's preparations. That color is perfect on you. It was my mother's, Clara said softly, smoothing the skirt. I've been saving it for, well, I wasn't sure what for. But this seemed like the right occasion. Sarah stepped into the room, her own simple calico dress freshly pressed. May I ask what happened to her? Your mother, I mean. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. Clara was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the delicate lace at the cuffs. Fever, 2 years ago. She'd been working herself to exhaustion, taking in sewing and laundry to keep us fed after the boarding school money ran out. Her body just gave up. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and the simple sincerity in her voice made Clara's throat tight. "So am I." Clara turned from the mirror, blinking back the sting of tears. "But she'd want me to go on living, to find joy where I can. So that's what I'm trying to do." The walk to the church was pleasant in the cooling evening air. The entire town seemed to be heading in the same direction, families in their Sunday best, children running ahead with barely contained excitement, elderly folks moving at a more measured pace. Clara recognized faces from the boarding house, from Anna's Thursday gathering, from her brief walks through town. The churchyard had been transformed. Long tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes, roasted meats, fresh breads, vegetable casseroles, fruit pies, and cakes of every description. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting warm pools of light as the sun began its descent. Someone had set up a small platform for musicians, and the sound of a fiddle being tuned drifted through the air. "Clara! Sarah!" Anna Pierce waved from near the dessert table, where she was arranging slices of pound cake on a platter. "Come help me before I eat all of this myself." They spent the next half hour assisting with final preparations, arranging food, setting out plates and utensils, filling glasses with punch and lemonade. Clara found herself relaxing into the communal effort, the shared purpose of creating something welcoming and festive. "Miss Winthrop." The deep voice behind her made Clara's heart skip. She turned to find Sheriff Callahan standing there, hat in hand, wearing what appeared to be his Sunday suit, dark trousers, a vest, and a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He'd shaved, and his dark hair was neatly combed, though one stubborn lock fell across his forehead. "Sheriff," Clara managed, suddenly very aware of how the green silk dress fit her figure. Reed's eyes traveled over her face, down to the dress, then back up. Something flickered in those gray depths that made Clara's breath catch. "You look... that color suits you." "Thank you." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself." A hint of a smile touched Reed's mouth. "Mrs. Hartley threatened to bar me from the social if I showed up in my work clothes, said she wouldn't have her event ruined by a dusty sheriff." "Mrs. Hartley is a force of nature," Clara agreed, grateful for the mundane topic to steady her nerves. "That she is." Reed glanced around at the gathering crowd. "Would you save me a dance later? Assuming you dance, that is." Clara's stomach fluttered. "I haven't danced in years. I'm probably terrible." "Then we'll be terrible together," Reed said. "The first waltz after dinner?" Before Clara could respond, a commotion near the food tables drew their attention. A tall, weathered man in expensive ranch clothes was speaking loudly to Mrs. Hartley, his voice carrying across the yard. "I'm just saying, Elizabeth and I would like to contribute. We brought 3 pies and a whole smoked ham. Surely that earns us a welcome." Clara's entire body went cold. That voice, deeper than she remembered, roughened by years and whiskey, but unmistakable. Her father had come to the social. Reed's hand touched her elbow, steadying. "Clara, don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Please don't." Mrs. Hartley's voice rose, firm and unyielding. "Charles Winthrop, I told you this wasn't appropriate. Your daughter is a guest here, and she's made her feelings clear." "She's my daughter," Charles protested. "I have a right. You have no rights where she's concerned." Anna Pierce appeared beside Mrs. Hartley, her usually gentle face set in hard lines. "You gave those up when you abandoned her at the depot." Clara watched, frozen, as her father's face reddened. A woman stood beside him, young, probably not yet 30, with blonde hair and a pinched, nervous expression. Elizabeth, presumably. The woman who'd decided Clara wasn't worth the inconvenience. "I made a mistake," Charles said, his voice lower now but still audible. "I'm trying to make it right. Surely she can understand that. Surely she can forgive. That's not your decision to make." Reed's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He'd moved away from Clara, positioning himself between her and her father. "Miss Winthrop has made her wishes known. You need to respect them and leave." Charles's eyes found Clara then, standing rigid near the punch table. Something passed over his face. Shame, perhaps, or regret. Clara, please, just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain. No. Clara was amazed her voice worked at all, given how her throat had closed. You explained everything in your letter. You chose your new wife over your daughter. There's nothing more to say. That's not fair. Elizabeth spoke for the first time, her voice high and defensive. We have limited resources. You couldn't be bothered, Clara heard herself say, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. You made your choice. Now live with it, and leave me to live with mine. The yard had gone completely silent. Every eye was on them, and Clara felt the weight of all that attention like a physical pressure. But she kept her chin up, kept her gaze locked on her father's face. Charles Winthrop opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. I know you are, Clara said quietly. But sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't give me back my mother, or my childhood, or the father I needed. It's just a word, Mr. Winthrop, and words are all you've ever given me. She turned and walked away, moving blindly through the crowd. She heard Reed call her name, heard Sarah's concerned voice, but she kept walking until she reached the edge of the churchyard, where the lantern light faded into darkness. Clara pressed her hands to her face, willing herself not to cry, not to let her father steal this evening from her the way he'd stolen so much else. She focused on breathing, in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way her mother had taught her when anxiety threatened to overwhelm. Footsteps approached, quiet but deliberate. Clara knew without looking that it was Reed. I'm fine, she said before he could speak. I know you are. Reed stopped beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. But you don't have to be fine all the time. Clara lowered her hands, staring out at the darkening desert. If I'm not fine, if I let myself feel everything I'm feeling, I'll fall apart. And I can't afford to fall apart. Why not? Reed's voice was gentle. Why can't you let yourself grieve, let yourself be angry, let yourself hurt? Because if I start, I'm afraid I won't be able to stop. The admission came out barely above a whisper. I'm afraid if I let the dam break, I'll drown in it. Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, 3 years ago, when I lost Mary and little Sarah, I tried to do exactly what you're doing. I tried to stay strong, stay in control, keep functioning. I thought if I just kept moving forward, the pain would eventually fade. Clara looked at him, seeing the old grief etched in the lines of his face. But it doesn't work that way, Reed continued. The pain doesn't fade when you ignore it. It just builds and builds until it comes out sideways. In anger, in bitterness, in walls so thick nobody can get through them. He met her eyes. I don't want that for you, Clara. You deserve better than a life spent hiding from your own heart. I don't know how to be any other way, Clara said helplessly. Then learn. Reed's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers warm and solid. Let people in. Let yourself feel. It'll hurt like hell, but on the other side of that hurt is something worth having. What? Clara asked. What's worth all this pain? Connection, community, maybe even love, if you're brave enough. Reed squeezed her hand gently. You're not alone anymore, Clara. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. Clara wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safe isolation she'd built around herself. But Reed's hand in hers felt like an anchor, solid and real. And some part of her, the part that was so tired of being strong alone, wanted desperately to believe him. Before she could respond, Anna appeared at the edge of the light. Clara, Reed, they're about to start the music. And Clara, your father and his wife have left. Mrs. Hartley made sure of it. Clara took a shaky breath. Thank you. Come back to the social, Anna urged. Don't let him take this from you. You've been working so hard you deserve an evening of joy. Reed released Clara's hand, stepping back to give her space. The choice is yours. But I meant what I said. I'd like that dance if you're willing. Clara looked between them, Anna with her encouraging smile, Reed with his steady, patient gaze. Behind them, the sounds of the social continued. Laughter, conversation, the first strains of a fiddle playing a lively tune. Life going on despite her drama, inviting her to join if she chose. All right, she heard herself say. One dance. Reed's smile was like sunrise. One dance is all I'm asking. They returned to the social together, and if people stared or whispered, Clara forced herself not to care. She filled a plate with food she barely tasted, made conversation with Sarah and the women from the Thursday gathering, and tried to recapture the sense of belonging she'd felt before her father's appearance. The musicians launched into a proper waltz just as darkness settled completely over the churchyard. Couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor, ranchers with their wives, young people courting, even Mrs. Hartley being spun around by the elderly banker. Reed appeared at Clara's elbow. "I believe you promised me this dance." Clara's heart hammered as she took his offered hand. "I warned you I'm rusty." "Lucky for you, I'm not much of a dancer either." Reed led her onto the floor, one hand settling at her waist, the other holding hers. "Just follow my lead, and try not to step on my feet too often." The first few steps were awkward, as Clara tried to remember the patterns she'd learned years ago at the boarding school. But Reed was patient, guiding her through the turns, keeping the rhythm steady. Gradually, muscle memory took over, and she found herself relaxing into the movement. "See?" Reed said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You're doing fine." Clara looked up at him, suddenly very aware of how close they were, how his hand felt at her waist, how his gray eyes reflected the lantern light. "This is dangerous," she said without thinking. Reed's brow furrowed. "Dancing? No. This." Clara gestured vaguely between them. Letting people in. Like you said, it's dangerous. People leave, they die, they choose someone else. Letting myself care just means giving them the power to hurt me." Reed's hand tightened slightly on hers. "That's true. Caring about people is the biggest risk there is. But Clara, living without caring, that's not really living at all. That's just existing, surviving. Is that really all you want from life?" "It's safer," Clara whispered. "Safer," Reed agreed, "but lonelier, emptier. And you're worth more than a safe, empty life." The music swelled around them, and Clara felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, but opening. "How do you know?" she asked. "How do you know I'm worth it?" Reed's smile was sad and knowing. "Because I see you, Clara Winthrop. I see how hard you work, how you refuse to give up even when you have every reason to. I see your strength and your kindness underneath all that fear. I see who you could be if you let yourself." With tears blurred Clara's vision, but she blinked them back. "You barely know me." "I know enough." The waltz was ending, the music slowing. Reed didn't release her immediately. "And I'd like to know more, if you'll let me." Clara opened her mouth to respond, but a commotion near the edge of the churchyard interrupted. A rider was approaching fast, calling for the sheriff. Reed released Clara immediately, his entire demeanor shifting from gentle suitor to lawman. "Over here!" The rider, a young ranch hand Clara recognized from the boarding house, pulled up his lathered horse. "Sheriff, we've got trouble at the Morrison Ranch. Rustlers hit them tonight, made off with near 30 head of cattle. Mr. Morrison's asking for you and a posse." Reed's jaw tightened. "How long ago?" "About an hour. Trail'll be fresh if we leave now." Reed turned to Clara, frustration and regret warring in his expression. "I have to go." "I know." Clara managed a small smile despite her disappointment. "Go. Do your job." Reed looked like he wanted to say more, but duty called. He strode toward his horse, calling for volunteers as he went. Within minutes, 6 men were mounted and ready to ride. Before he left, Reed caught Clara's eye across the churchyard. He touched his hat in a small salute, a promise in his eyes that this conversation wasn't over. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the lanterns. Anna appeared at Clara's side, slipping an arm through hers. "He'll be back. Reed Callahan always comes back." Clara nodded, unable to speak around the sudden tightness in her throat. She'd been in Silver Creek less than 2 weeks, yet somehow the thought of Reed riding into danger made her chest ache in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. The social continued, but the festive mood was dampened by the news of rustlers. People gathered in small groups, discussing the ongoing problems with cattle theft, speculating about who might be behind it. Clara learned that this was the 3rd ranch hit in as many months, and tensions were running high. Mrs. Hartley found Clara near midnight. "Come on, dear, let's get you home. You look exhausted." Clara was grateful for the excuse to leave. The emotional confrontation with her father, the charged dance with Reed, and now the worry gnawing at her stomach had left her drained. She said her goodbyes and walked back to the boarding house with Mrs. Hartley and Sarah, the streets quiet and dark. In her room, Clara changed into her nightgown and sat at the small table, too restless to sleep. She pulled out a piece of writing paper and a pen, intending to write another letter to her mother's memory. But what came out instead was something different entirely. "Dear Mama," she wrote, "something is happening to me here in Silver Creek. I'm starting to care about people, really care, in ways that terrify me. There's a sheriff named Reed Callahan who sees things in me I don't see in myself. There's a teacher named Anna Pierce who's offered me friendship and opportunity. There are good people here, Mama. People who make me want to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserve good things too." She paused, pen hovering over the paper. "But I'm so scared. What if I open my heart and lose everything again? What if caring about Reed means watching him ride into danger and never come back? What if building a life here means setting down roots that can be ripped up just as painfully as the ones I lost when you died?" Clara set down the pen, unable to continue. She folded the unfinished letter and tucked it away, then climbed into bed and lay staring at the ceiling. Sleep was a long time coming. Every sound from the street made her wonder if it was Reed returning. She found herself straining to hear hoofbeats, voices, any sign that the posse had come back safely. It was nearly dawn when she finally heard horses in the street. Clara rushed to her window, pressing her face against the glass. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could make out several riders approaching the sheriff's office. She counted 6, the same number that had left. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. He was back. They were all back. Clara climbed back into bed, and this time sleep came easily, carrying her into dreams where she danced in Reed Callahan's arms under endless stars. The next 2 weeks fell into a new pattern. Clara's days were split between the boarding house and the schoolhouse, and she discovered a talent for teaching that surprised her. The younger children responded to her patient explanations and gentle corrections. Even the older students, initially skeptical of the new teacher from Boston, began to warm to her. Reed stopped by the schoolhouse several afternoons each week, ostensibly to check on security, but really, Clara suspected, to see her. They fell into easy conversations about the children's progress, about town news, about books they'd both read. Sometimes he'd bring her coffee from the general store. Once he brought her a book he thought she'd enjoy, a volume of Tennyson's poetry that must have cost him a week's wages. "You shouldn't have," Clara protested when he presented it. "I wanted to," Reed said simply. "I saw it in the catalog at the store and thought of you." Clara ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words. "Thank you, truly." Their relationship, if it could be called that, existed in a strange liminal space. More than friendship, but not quite courtship, defined by meaningful looks and hands that almost touched, conversations that hinted at deeper feelings neither was quite brave enough to voice. Anna noticed, of course. "Sheriff Callahan seems quite taken with you," she observed one Thursday evening after the reading group. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We're friends." "Friends," Anna repeated with a knowing smile. "Is that what we're calling it?" "I don't know what else to call it," Clara admitted. "I don't know what he wants, and I'm not sure I'm ready to find out." Anna's expression grew more serious. "Reed Callahan is a good man, Clara. One of the best I've known. He's been alone for a long time, locked in his grief. If he's opening his heart to you, that's significant." "That's what scares me," Clara said quietly. "What if I'm not ready? What if I hurt him? What if I can't be what he needs?" "What if you can?" Anna countered. "What if you're exactly what he needs, and he's exactly what you need, but fear keeps you both from finding that out?" Clara had no answer to that. The answer came, unbidden, on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after the church social. Clara was teaching the younger children their letters when a telegram messenger appeared at the schoolhouse door. "Miss Clara Winthrop?" he asked breathlessly. Clara's heart sank. Nothing good ever came by telegram. "Yes?" "This came for you. It's urgent, marked immediate." Clara took the yellow envelope with shaking hands. The children watched with wide eyes as she tore it open. The words swam before her vision, but their meaning was brutally clear. "Clara, stop your Aunt Margaret gravely ill." Stop. Doctors say days, not weeks. Stop. Request your presence. Stop funds for travel wired to Silver Creek Bank. Stop. Family lawyer Henderson. Clara read it twice, 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Aunt Margaret, her mother's sister, the woman who'd grudgingly paid for her boarding school, who'd made clear that Clara was an obligation rather than family. She was dying, and she wanted Clara. Miss Winthrop? One of the older students, a bright girl named Emma, looked concerned. Are you all right? Clara realized she was crushing the telegram in her fist. Yes. Continue with your copywork, please. I need to speak with Miss Pierce. She found Anna in the back room, preparing materials for the next day's lessons. Anna took one look at Clara's face and set down her supplies. What's happened? Clara handed her the telegram. Anna read it quickly, sympathy flooding her features. Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry. I have to go, Clara heard herself say. I have to go to Boston. She's my mother's sister. Whatever our differences, I can't let her die alone. Of course not, Anna agreed. When will you leave? As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if there's a train. Clara's mind was already racing ahead, calculating what she needed to do. I'll need to tell Mrs. Hartley, arrange for someone to cover my duties at the boarding house, pack. We'll handle everything, Anna assured her. Don't worry about the school. I'll manage until you return. Until you return. The words hung in the air, heavy with assumption. Clara realized she hadn't thought that far ahead. Would she return? Boston was her past, the place she'd fled. But it was also where her mother was buried, where her few remaining family connections existed. And Silver Creek was, what? A temporary refuge? A place she'd stumbled into by accident? Or was it becoming something more? I don't know if I'm coming back, Clara said quietly. Anna's eyes widened. Clara. I don't know, Clara repeated, more firmly this time. My aunt might need ongoing care. There might be estate matters to settle. I don't know. You should tell Reed, Anna said. He deserves to know you're leaving. Clara's chest tightened. Reed. How did she tell him she was leaving when she wasn't sure herself if it was temporary or permanent? How did she explain that the thought of saying goodbye to him hurt almost as much as the thought of her aunt's impending death? She found him at his office an hour later, after dismissing the school children early and explaining the situation to a tearful Sarah. Reed was at his desk, working through paperwork, but he stood immediately when Clara entered. Clara, I was just thinking about you. There's a new shipment of books at the general store, and I thought... He stopped, reading her expression. What's wrong? Clara handed him the telegram without speaking. Reed read it, his jaw tightening. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning. There's a train at 8. Tomorrow. Reed set the telegram on his desk carefully, as if it might explode. That's soon. I know. Clara twisted her hands together. I have to go, Reed. She's family. She's all the family I have left. I understand. Reed's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed him. Of course you have to go. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything they weren't saying. Reed, Clara. They spoke simultaneously, then both stopped. Reed gestured for her to continue. I don't know how long I'll be gone, Clara said, the words tumbling out in a rush. My aunt might need care for weeks or months. There might be legal matters to handle. And Boston is... It's where my mother is buried, where my past is. I don't know what I might need to do. Are you coming back? Reed asked bluntly. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. At the strong lines of his face, the gray eyes that saw too much, the way he stood perfectly still as if bracing for a blow. I don't know, she whispered. I honestly don't know. Something flickered across Reed's face. Pain, quickly shuddered. I see. Do you? Clara stepped closer, desperate to make him understand. Reed, I've been here less than 2 months. 2 months ago I had nothing, no home, no prospects, no future. And then Silver Creek happened. You happened. Anna and Mrs. Hartley and the school, and all of it happened. But I don't know if it's real. I don't know if I'm building something lasting or just hiding from my past. And you think going back to Boston will help you figure that out? Reed's voice was gentle but pointed.
Maybe. Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. Or maybe it'll make me realize that this, Silver Creek, the life I'm building here, is exactly what I've been looking for all along. But I need to know, Reed. I need to face my past so I can choose my future. Can you understand that? Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the distance between them and took her hands in his. I understand more than you know. When Mary died, I tried to run from the pain, tried to bury myself in work and duty and anything that would keep me from feeling. It didn't work. The past caught up with me anyway, and I had to face it whether I wanted to or not. He squeezed her hands gently. So yes, I understand, and I won't ask you to stay, won't ask you to choose before you're ready. But Clara, his voice roughened with emotion, I need you to know something before you go. Clara's heart hammered. What? I love you. The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward. I know it's too soon. I know you're not ready to hear it, but you're leaving tomorrow, and I can't let you go without saying it. I love you, Clara Winthrop. Your strength, your courage, your wounded heart that keeps fighting to heal. All of it. All of you. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at Reed as his confession washed over her. You don't have to say anything, Reed continued, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability in his eyes. You don't have to feel the same way. But when you're in Boston, facing your past and making your choices, I want you to know that you have someone here who loves you, who will be waiting for you if you choose to come back, who will understand if you don't. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. Reed. He released one of her hands to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. Go to Boston. Take care of your aunt. Face whatever you need to face. And when you're ready, when you know what you want, you'll know where to find me. Clara rose on her toes and kissed him. A brief, trembling press of lips that conveyed everything she couldn't put into words. Hope and fear and gratitude and something that might be love, if she was brave enough to name it. When she pulled back, Reed's eyes were bright. Was that goodbye? He asked quietly. I don't know, Clara said honestly. Maybe it's hello. Maybe it's both. I don't know anything right now except that I'm terrified and you're the only person who makes me feel like I might survive this. Reed pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she cried against his chest. You'll survive it, he murmured into her hair. You're the strongest person I know. And whatever you decide, wherever you end up, you'll be all right. Will I? Clara asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. Yes. Reed's certainty wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Because you're Clara Winthrop, and you don't know how to give up. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms in the dimming light of the sheriff's office. Outside, Silver Creek settled into evening, unaware that one of its newest residents was preparing to leave. Finally, Clara pulled back, wiping her eyes. I should go. I need to pack, talk to Mrs. Hartley, make arrangements. I'll walk you back to the boarding house, Reed offered. No, Clara managed a watery smile. If you walk me back, I'll want to stay longer, and then I won't be ready in time for the morning train. Let me say goodbye here. Reed nodded, understanding but clearly unhappy about it. He walked her to the door, his hand lingering on hers for a moment. Safe travels, Clara. And remember. I know, Clara interrupted softly. I'll remember. She walked back to the boarding house alone, the evening shadows lengthening around her. Mrs. Hartley took the news with characteristic practicality, immediately helping Clara plan what to pack and arranging for Sarah to take over her duties. Anna stopped by with a small journal. Write what you want, she said, pressing it into Clara's hands. Then choose what you want. Sometimes seeing our thoughts on paper helps clarify them. That night, Clara packed by lamplight, her 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, the derringer she'd carried from Boston, the book of poetry Reed had given her. She included her father's letter, still unread beyond that first painful reading, and the unfinished letters to her mother's memory. Finally, she pulled out the journal Anna had given her and wrote her first entry. Tomorrow I leave for Boston, and I don't know if I'm running towards something or away from it. Reed Callahan told me he loves me. I should have said it back, but the words wouldn't come. Not because I don't feel them, I think I do, God help me, but because saying them out loud makes them real, and real things can be lost. She paused, pen hovering over the page. The truth is,
I'm terrified of loving anyone. Loving my mother didn't save her. Loving my father didn't make him stay. What if loving Reed just means giving him the power to destroy me? What if I'm not strong enough to survive losing someone else? Clara closed the journal and placed it in her valise, next to her mother's Bible. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions, or perhaps just the next step in a journey she was still learning to navigate. She climbed into bed for her last night in the narrow room that had become her sanctuary. Through the window, she could see the stars, the same stars that would shine over Boston, connecting her to the life she was leaving behind, at least for now. And somewhere in Silver Creek, Reed Callahan was also looking at those stars, waiting for a woman who didn't know if she was coming back. The morning Clara left Silver Creek, Reed Callahan stood on the depot platform in the gray dawn light, his hat in his hands. He told himself he wouldn't come, that saying goodbye once was hard enough. But his feet had carried him here anyway, drawn by the desperate need to see her one more time. Clara appeared with Mrs. Hartley and Sarah, her worn valise in hand, the same one she'd carried when she'd first arrived. But everything else about her was different. She stood straighter now, held her head higher. The terrified, broken woman who'd walked away from this very depot 2 months ago had been replaced by someone stronger, more certain of her own worth. Their eyes met across the platform, and Clara's steps faltered. "You came." "I shouldn't have," Reed admitted. "But I couldn't let you leave without—" He stopped, unsure what he'd come to say that hadn't already been said. Mrs. Hartley tactfully steered Sarah toward the ticket window, giving them privacy. Clara set down her valise and stepped closer to Reed. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly. "I wanted to see you again, but I didn't know how to ask." Reed reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. "I thought you might want this, for the journey. Anna mentioned she gave you one, but I thought, well, 2 journals are better than 1. Clara took it, her fingers brushing his. The journal was beautiful, clearly expensive, with her initials embossed on the cover in gold. "Reed, this is too much." "It's not enough," Reed said, "but it's what I have to give. Write in it. Write about Boston, about your aunt, about whatever you're feeling. And Clara," his voice dropped lower, "if you decide not to come back, write me a letter. Don't just disappear. I need to know you're all right, even if you're all right somewhere else." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to hurt you." "Then come back," Reed said simply. "But if you can't, if Boston is where you need to be, then tell me that. Just don't leave me wondering." The train whistle sounded in the distance, and they both turned to watch the engine approaching through the morning mist. Time was running out. Clara rose on her toes and kissed Reed, longer this time, pouring into it all the feelings she couldn't name. When she pulled back, both of them were shaking. "All right," she promised. "Whether I'm coming back or not, I'll write. That's all I'm asking." Reed picked up her valise and walked with her to the train. He helped her aboard, his hand steady on her elbow, and then stood back as she found a window seat. Clara pressed her palm against the glass. Reed mirrored the gesture from the platform, their hands separated by mere inches of glass but a gulf of uncertainty. The train lurched forward. Clara kept her eyes on Reed as the depot slid away, watching him grow smaller and smaller until he was just a dark figure in the distance, then nothing at all. Only then did she allow herself to cry. The journey east was nothing like the desperate westward flight that had brought Clara to Arizona. This time she traveled with purpose and funds, sleeping in actual berths instead of sitting up all night, eating in dining cars instead of subsisting on hard rolls and cheese. The landscape rolled by in reverse, desert giving way to plains, plains to forests, forests to the familiar eastern countryside. Clara wrote in both journals Reed and Anna had given her. In Anna's, she wrote about the practical details of her journey, the people she met, her observations about how the country changed from west to east. In Reed's journal, the one with her initials in gold, she wrote the truth of her heart. "I miss you already," she wrote on the second night. "How is that possible? I've known you for such a short time, yet the thought of never seeing you again makes it hard to breathe. The woman I was when I left Boston would have laughed at this, at the idea that a frontier sheriff could matter so much. But I'm not that woman anymore. You changed me, Reed. Silver Creek changed me. I just don't know if the change is permanent or if I'll revert to who I was once I'm back in familiar territory." Boston appeared on the 6th day, rising from the landscape like a memory made solid. The brick buildings, the cobblestone streets, the crush of people. It was all achingly familiar, and yet somehow foreign. Clara realized with a start that she'd become accustomed to wide-open spaces and clear skies. The close quarters and gray fog of Boston felt oppressive. A hired carriage took her to her aunt's townhouse in Beacon Hill, an elegant three-story structure that spoke of old money and older traditions. The housekeeper who answered the door, Mrs. Walsh, who'd been with Aunt Margaret for 30 years, looked genuinely pleased to see Clara. "Miss Winthrop, thank goodness you've come. Your aunt will be so relieved." Clara was led upstairs to a bedroom that had been converted into a sick room. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light, and the air smelled of medicine and something else, something that reminded Clara too much of her mother's final days. Aunt Margaret lay in the massive four-poster bed, looking impossibly small and frail. She'd always been a formidable woman, tall and stern, with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes that could reduce grown men to stammering boys. Now those eyes were faded and dim, her once sturdy frame reduced to skin and bones. "Clara?" Her voice was a whisper. "You came." Clara crossed to the bed and took her aunt's withered hand. "Of course I came. Your family." Aunt Margaret's laugh turned into a cough. "Family. That's rich. I treated you terribly after your mother died. Sent you off to school and washed my hands of you. Why would you come for me?" "Because my mother would want me to," Clara said simply. "And because, despite everything, you did provide for me when you didn't have to. That counts for something." Tears leaked from the corners of Aunt Margaret's eyes. "Your mother was the good one, the kind one. I was always harder, more practical. She used to say I had a heart of stone." "Hearts of stone don't cry," Clara pointed out gently. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara settled into a routine of caring for her dying aunt. The doctor came daily, adjusting medications and shaking his head gravely. Mrs. Walsh handled the household with practiced efficiency, giving Clara space to simply be present. And slowly, painfully, Aunt Margaret began to talk, really talk, about the past. "I resented your mother for marrying your father," she confessed one afternoon. "We came from a good family, had prospects. She could have married well, secured her future. Instead, she fell in love with a charming dreamer who left her with nothing but broken promises and a child to raise alone." "She never regretted it," Clara said. "Even at the end, even when we had nothing, she said loving him had been worth it." Aunt Margaret turned her head on the pillow to look at Clara. "Do you understand that now? Is there someone in Arizona who's made you understand why your mother chose love over security?" Clara thought of Reed standing on the platform, watching her leave. "Maybe. I don't know yet." "Then you're smarter than your mother was," Aunt Margaret said, "or perhaps more cautious. There's wisdom in both." As the days passed, Clara found herself writing to Reed every evening, long letters that she sealed and posted before she could second-guess herself. She told him about her aunt's condition, about the conversations they were having, about how strange it felt to be back in Boston. She told him about walking to the cemetery where her mother was buried, about standing at the grave and finally truly saying goodbye. Reed's responses came regularly, forwarded from Silver Creek. His letters were shorter than hers, but no less meaningful. He wrote about the daily happenings in town, how Sarah was managing well at the boarding house, how Anna sent her regards, how the school children asked about Miss Winthrop every day. He wrote about a particularly difficult cattle rustling case he'd solved, about the new preacher who'd arrived and was causing quite a stir with his passionate sermons. But he never pressured her to return, never asked when she was coming back. He simply wrote as if they were two people sharing their lives across distance, and Clara loved him for that restraint, even as it made her heart ache. 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, Aunt Margaret rallied enough to ask for her lawyer, Mr. Betancourt. Henderson arrived with his leather satchel full of documents, and Clara was asked to sit in on the meeting. "I'm changing my will," Aunt Margaret announced without preamble. "Everything, the house, the investments, the trust funds, goes to Clara." Clara's eyes widened. "Aunt Margaret, I can't." "You can and you will," her aunt interrupted with a flash of her old imperious nature. "There's no one else. Your cousins have their own money, their own families. You're my sister's daughter, and this is how I make amends for failing both of you." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Miss Winthrop, your aunt's estate is quite substantial. The house alone is worth approximately $15,000. The investments and trust funds total another $30,000. You would be a wealthy woman." The numbers were staggering. $45,000. More money than Clara had ever imagined having. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life, to travel, to do anything she wanted. Enough to never have to depend on anyone again. "I don't know what to say," Clara managed. "Say you'll use it wisely," Aunt Margaret said. "Say you'll build a life that makes you happy, not one that makes you safe. Your mother chose love and died poor but content. I chose security, and I'm dying wealthy but alone. Find the balance, Clara. That's all I ask." Mr. Henderson drew up the new documents, and Aunt Margaret signed with a shaking hand. When it was done, she lay back against her pillows, exhausted but peaceful. "There's something else," she said to Clara. "In my jewelry box, top drawer of the bureau, the emerald ring. It was your grandmother's, should have gone to your mother. I want you to have it." Clara retrieved the ring, a stunning emerald surrounded by small diamonds set in gold. It was the kind of ring that spoke of heritage and history, of family bonds that transcended petty resentments. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed. "It's yours," Aunt Margaret said. "Wear it or sell it or give it away. Just promise me something, Clara. Anything. Promise me you won't let fear make your choices." I did that. I chose safety over love, duty over desire, and now I'm dying with regrets instead of memories. Don't be like me. Be brave. Be like your mother, just with better judgment about men. Clara laughed through her tears. "I promise." That night, Clara wrote to Reed about the inheritance, about her aunt's advice. She poured out her confusion and fear onto the pages, trying to make sense of what this money meant for her future. "I could do anything now," she wrote. "I could buy my own house here in Boston, rejoin the society I left behind. I could travel to Europe, see all the places I've only read about. I could start a school of my own, or open a bookshop, or simply live quietly on the interest from the investments. The world is open to me in ways it never was before." She paused, staring at the words she'd written. "But all I can think about is a small Arizona town with dusty streets and honest people, about a boarding house where I learned the value of hard work, about a one-room schoolhouse where children called me Miss Winthrop with respect, about a sheriff with gray eyes who sees me, really sees me, in ways no one else ever has." Clara set down her pen and walked to the window, looking out at the gas-lit streets of Boston. This city had been her home, her prison, her past. It held her mother's grave and her family's history. It offered her security and status and all the trappings of civilized society. But it didn't hold her heart. The realization settled over her like morning light, clear and undeniable. Her heart was in Silver Creek, with Reed Callahan. Her future, if she was brave enough to claim it, waited in the Arizona territory, not in the drawing rooms of Boston. Aunt Margaret died peacefully in her sleep 4 days later. Clara was sitting beside her bed, reading aloud from Pride and Prejudice, when she noticed the change in her aunt's breathing. By the time Mrs. Walsh arrived with the doctor, it was over. The funeral was a grand affair, attended by Boston's elite. Clara stood in her black mourning dress, accepting condolences from people who'd never given her a second thought when she was poor. She recognized the hollowness in their sympathy, the calculation in their eyes as they assessed the newly wealthy Miss Winthrop. These people weren't her community. They never had been. The estate settlement took another 3 weeks. Mr. Henderson proved to be both efficient and kind, walking Clara through every detail of her inheritance. The house was put up for sale, the investments transferred to her name. Clara kept only a few pieces of furniture with sentimental value and her grandmother's jewelry, including the emerald ring. "What will you do now?" Mr. Henderson asked at their final meeting. "Will you stay in Boston?" Clara looked at the ring on her finger, remembering her aunt's words about being brave. "No, I'm going back to Arizona." The lawyer's eyebrows rose. "Arizona? My dear, with your fortune, you could live anywhere. Surely you'd be more comfortable here, or perhaps New York, or—" "I'm going back to Arizona," Clara repeated firmly. "That's where I belong."
She spent her last week in Boston tying up loose ends and saying goodbye. She visited her mother's grave one final time, placing flowers on the headstone and whispering a promise to live the kind of life that would make her proud. She donated most of her aunt's books to the public library and arranged for several pieces of furniture to be shipped west. And every evening she wrote to Reed, though she didn't tell him about her decision. That news needed to be delivered in person.
On her final night in Boston, Clara sat in the empty townhouse, now sold to a young lawyer and his family, and wrote her last journal entry. Tomorrow I go home, not to the Boston of my childhood, not to the life I thought I wanted, but to Silver Creek, to the life I've chosen. I have money now, independence, security. I don't need Reed Callahan to take care of me. I don't need anyone. But I want him. I want the life we could build together. I want to teach in Anna's school and have coffee with Mrs. Hartley and watch sunsets over the Arizona desert. I want all of it, not because I have no other options, but because I've seen what else is available and I choose this. I choose love. I choose home. I choose Reed. The train journey west felt endless. Clara changed trains in Chicago, then Kansas City, counting down the miles until she reached Silver Creek. She'd sent one telegram to Mrs. Hartley announcing her return, but she'd asked the older woman not to tell anyone else. She wanted to surprise Reed, wanted to see his face when she arrived. The landscape changed from green to brown to red as she traveled, and Clara felt her heart lift with every mile. This was right. This was home. The train pulled into Silver Creek's depot on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. Clara stepped onto the familiar platform, breathing in the dry desert air and feeling something settle deep in her chest. Peace, certainty, joy. Mrs. Hartley was waiting, beaming with pleasure. "Welcome home, dear girl. Look at you, so elegant in your traveling suit. I barely recognize you." Clara laughed and embraced the older woman. "It's good to be back. I've missed this place more than I can say." "We've missed you too. The whole town has." Mrs. Hartley picked up Clara's valise. New, expensive, a far cry from the battered one she'd carried before. "Reed's been like a bear with a sore paw since you left, snapping at everyone, working himself to exhaustion." "That boy's in love with you, Clara. I hope you've come back to do something about it." Clara's pulse quickened. "Where is he?" "Out on patrol. Won't be back until tomorrow morning." Mrs. Hartley saw Clara's disappointment and patted her arm. "Come back to the boarding house. Get settled. He'll be all the more delighted to see you when he returns." But Clara shook her head, a plan forming. "Actually, Mrs. Hartley, I need your help with something." That evening, while Reed was still out on patrol, Clara put her plan into motion. With Mrs. Hartley and Anna's assistance, she arranged for the housekeeper to deliver a message to Reed's office first thing in the morning, asking him to come to the schoolhouse at noon on urgent business. Then Clara went to the school and transformed it. She brought flowers from the general store, wildflowers and desert blooms that thrived in Arizona soil. She set up a table with a white cloth and the good china Mrs. Hartley loaned her. She prepared a simple lunch of the foods she'd learned Reed favored during their months of friendship: roast chicken, fresh bread, apple pie. And she waited. The morning crawled by. Clara changed her dress 3 times, settled on the blue silk, then changed again to a simple yellow cotton that seemed less presumptuous. She arranged and rearranged the flowers. She practiced what she wanted to say, then abandoned her planned speech as too formal. At 11:45, she heard boots on the wooden steps outside. Her heart leaped into her throat. The door opened and Reed Callahan stepped inside. He looked tired, Clara noted immediately. Thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes. His face was dusty from the trail, his clothes worn from hard use. But his eyes, those steady gray eyes, were exactly as she remembered. He stopped dead when he saw her, his hat falling from his hands. "Clara?" She stepped forward, drinking in the sight of him. "Hello, Reed. You're here." His voice was rough, disbelieving. "You're really here. I'm really here." Clara's hands twisted together nervously. "I know you weren't expecting me. Mrs. Hartley's message was a trick. I wanted to surprise you." Reed crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just short of touching her. His eyes searched her face desperately. "How long? How long are you staying?" Clara reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "I'm staying, Reed. I'm staying forever, if you'll have me.
His eyes closed, and when they opened again, they were bright with unshed tears. Clara. Let me finish, she interrupted. I need to say this. I went to Boston to face my past, and I did. My aunt died and left me her entire estate. I'm wealthy now, Reed, independently wealthy. I don't need anyone to take care of me. I don't need rescue or charity or even a home because I can provide all of that for myself. Reed's face had gone very still, and Clara saw something that might have been resignation in his eyes. But here's what I do need, she continued, her voice strengthening. I need you. I need your steady presence and your quiet strength. I need your patience and your kindness and the way you see the best in me, even when I can't see it myself. I need your love, Reed Callahan, not because I'm dependent on it, but because it makes me better, braver, more fully myself. She took a shaking breath. You told me you loved me before I left, and I didn't say it back because I was too scared, but I'm not scared anymore. I love you. I love you with everything I am, and I've come back to Silver Creek, to you, to build the life we both deserve. If you still want me, if I haven't waited too long. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then Reed pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. If I still want you? His voice broke. Clara, I've thought of nothing but you for 3 months. Waited for every letter, like a drowning man waiting for air. I told myself I'd let you go if that's what you needed, but God, I was hoping you'd come back. Clara pulled back enough to look up at him. I came back, and I'm not leaving again. This is home now. You're home. Reed kissed her then. A kiss nothing like the brief, uncertain ones they'd shared before. This was a claiming, a promise, a declaration. Clara melted into it, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the love and certainty she'd been storing up for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Reed rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Clara laughed, joy bubbling up irresistibly. That's not a question. Marry me, Reed tried again, smiling. Please? As soon as possible? Because I've loved you since you walked away from the depot with $3 and a Derringer, and I don't want to wait another day to make you my wife. Yes, Clara said, the word coming easily, perfectly. Yes, I'll marry you. Tomorrow, next week, whenever you want. Just yes. They kissed again, softer this time, sealing the promise. Outside, Silver Creek went about its business, unaware that in the little schoolhouse, 2 wounded hearts were finally finding their way home to each other. Reed refused to let Clara out of his sight for the rest of that afternoon. They sat together at the small table she'd prepared, the lunch growing cold as they talked and talked, filling in all the gaps the letters hadn't covered. Clara told him about her aunt's deathbed confessions, about the inheritance that had changed everything and nothing. Reed told her about the long nights when he'd wondered if she'd ever return, about how he'd read her letters over and over until he'd memorized every word. I kept telling myself to let you go, Reed admitted, his hand covering hers on the table. That you deserved better than a small-town sheriff in the middle of nowhere. That Boston could offer you everything I couldn't. Boston offered me money and status, Clara said, but it couldn't offer me what matters. It couldn't offer me you or this community or the life I want to build. I don't need grand houses or society balls, Reed. I need a place where I belong, where I matter. And that place is here. Reed lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I still can't quite believe you're real. That you came back. I'm real, Clara assured him, and I'm not going anywhere. The news of Clara's return spread through Silver Creek like a brush fire. By evening, the boarding house was filled with well-wishers, Sarah crying happy tears, Mrs. Hartley beaming with satisfaction, Anna Pierce hugging Clara tightly and whispering that she'd known all along Clara would come back. Even some of the townspeople Clara barely knew stopped by to welcome her home, as if her 2-month absence had somehow transformed her from newcomer to cherished resident. You should have seen Reed while you were gone, Martha from the boarding house confided in a whisper, moping around like his world had ended. We all knew he was in love with you, even if he tried to hide it. Clara glanced across the room to where Reed stood talking with the banker and found him looking back at her. Their eyes met, and the warmth in his gaze made her chest tight with happiness.
They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church where Clara had attended her first social gathering. The delay was only because Clara insisted on doing things properly. She wanted a real wedding, not a hasty ceremony that people would gossip about. She wanted to stand up before this community that had adopted her and make her vows with intention and joy. Mrs. Hartley and Anna helped her prepare. Together they sewed a dress of cream-colored silk that Clara had shipped from Boston, simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Anna arranged wildflowers and autumn branches for the church decorations. Mrs. Hartley baked a 3-tiered cake that was the talk of the territory. The morning of the wedding, Clara woke in her small room at the boarding house for the last time. She'd already arranged to purchase a plot of land on the edge of town, 5 acres with a view of the valley where she'd first arrived. The house wasn't built yet, but the plans were drawn. Reed had insisted on contributing to the construction despite Clara's protest that she could afford it herself. "We're going to be partners," he'd said firmly. "That means we build together, contribute together. I won't have you thinking I married you for your money, and I won't have people saying I'm living off my wife's inheritance. We do this together or not at all." Clara had loved him even more for that stubborn pride. Sarah helped her dress, chattering nervously about the ceremony. "Everyone in town will be there. I've never seen the church so full. Even your father sent word asking if he could attend." Clara's hands stilled on the buttons of her dress. She'd received a letter from Charles Winthrop 3 days after returning to Silver Creek, a careful, humble note congratulating her on her engagement and asking if there was any possibility of reconciliation. She hadn't responded yet, couldn't decide what she felt about the man who'd abandoned her twice. "What did you tell him?" Clara asked quietly. "Mrs. Hartley said it was your decision to make," Sarah said. "She's holding his messenger at the front door waiting for an answer." Clara walked to the window and looked out at Silver Creek's main street, already bustling with activity despite the early hour. She thought about her aunt's deathbed advice. Don't let fear make your choices. She thought about her mother, who'd believed in forgiveness and second chances even when they weren't deserved. "Tell him he can come," Clara said finally, "but he sits in the back, and he doesn't approach me unless I approach him first." Sarah nodded and hurried off to deliver the message. Anna appeared in the doorway moments later, holding a small bouquet of white roses and desert sage. "Ready?" Anna asked with a gentle smile. "Ready," Clara confirmed, "more ready than I've ever been for anything." The church was indeed packed. Every pew was filled with people standing along the walls and crowding in the doorway. Clara processed down the aisle on Mrs. Hartley's arm. The older woman had tearfully accepted Clara's request to stand in as family, and her eyes found Reed immediately. He stood at the altar with the new preacher, wearing his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed. But it was his expression that made Clara's breath catch, such open, unguarded love that she felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this good, steady, honorable man, was choosing her, and she was choosing him. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They recited traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When Reed slipped his mother's wedding ring onto Clara's finger, a plain gold band worn smooth by years of wear, she felt the weight of it like a promise kept. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Reed's kiss was gentle and reverent, a beginning rather than an ending. The reception was held in the churchyard under a brilliant November sky. Long tables groaned with food that the entire community had contributed. Musicians played fiddles and guitars. Children ran shrieking between the adults, drunk on cake and excitement. Clara was hugged by what felt like every person in the territory, welcomed into families and friendships with genuine warmth. Even her father approached, Elizabeth hovering nervously at his side. He looked older than Clara remembered, gray threading through his hair, his face lined with care and regret. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, "thank you for letting me come. It means more than you know." Clara studied him for a long moment. She could hold on to her anger, nurse her resentment, make him pay for his failures. Or she could choose differently, choose the kind of grace her mother would have shown. "I'm glad you're here," she said finally, and was surprised to find she meant it. "This is my husband, Sheriff Reed Callahan. Reed, this is my father, Charles Winthrop, and his wife Elizabeth." The introduction was stiff and formal, but it was a start. Reed shook Charles's hand with careful courtesy, and Elizabeth managed a tremulous smile. They didn't stay long, just long enough to offer their congratulations and good wishes before retreating to the edges of the celebration. "That was generous of you," Reed said quietly when they were alone again. "Maybe," Clara allowed, "or maybe I'm just tired of carrying anger around like a stone in my chest. He'll never be the father I needed, but maybe we can find some kind of peace." "Whatever you decide, I'll support it," Reed promised. "He's your father. That's your choice to make." As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the churchyard with Anna Pierce, watching Reed dance with Sarah, while Mrs. Hartley looked on with maternal pride. "You did it," Anna said softly. "You built yourself a life worth living." "We did it," Clara corrected. "You, Mrs. Hartley, Sarah, even Reed, you all helped me build this. I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not," Anna agreed, "but you were brave enough to accept the help. That takes courage, too." She paused, then added, "I have something to tell you. I've been offered a position in Tucson, a chance to start a teacher training program for the territory. It's an incredible opportunity." Clara's heart sank. "You're leaving?" "Not for another 6 months," Anna assured her, "and I'm recommending you as my replacement at the school. You're more than ready, Clara. The children love you, the parents respect you, and you have the intelligence and compassion to make a real difference." "I don't know," Clara said uncertainly. "Running the whole school? That's a lot of responsibility." "You can handle it," Anna said with confidence. "And besides, you won't be doing it alone. You'll have Reed's support, the community's backing, and your own considerable resources to draw on." She smiled. "Think about it. You have time to decide." Reed appeared then, claiming Clara for a dance. As they waltzed under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed Clara's arrival in Silver Creek 4 months ago, she marveled at how completely her life had changed. "What are you thinking?" Reed asked, seeing her expression. "That I'm happy," Clara said simply. "Truly, deeply happy. I didn't know I could feel this way." Reed pulled her closer. "Get used to it, Mrs. Callahan. I plan to keep you this happy for the next 50 or 60 years. Clara laughed, joy bubbling up irresistibly. "Only 50 or 60? I was hoping for longer." "Greedy," Reed teased, kissing her temple. "I like that about you." They spent their wedding night in a small hotel in the neighboring town, the closest thing to privacy they could manage. Clara had been nervous about this part, but Reed was patient and gentle, and the intimacy they shared felt like a natural extension of the emotional connection they'd already forged. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Clara finally felt like she'd come home to herself. "No regrets?" Reed asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "None," Clara said truthfully. "Not about this, not about coming back, not about any of it. This is exactly where I'm meant to be." The next months unfolded with a sweetness Clara had never imagined possible. She and Reed moved into a small house in town while their land was being prepared. Reed's modest sheriff's quarters expanded to accommodate a wife. It was cramped and simple, but Clara loved every inch of it. She loved cooking breakfast while Reed shaved in the small mirror above the wash basin. Loved the way he'd come home for lunch just to see her. Loved falling asleep in his arms every night and waking to his kiss every morning. She continued teaching at the school, and when Anna left for Tucson in the spring, Clara officially took over as headmistress. With her inheritance, she was able to expand the school, adding another room, hiring a second teacher, purchasing new books and supplies. The children flourished under her care, and parents began sending their daughters as well as their sons, recognizing that Clara believed education was for everyone regardless of gender. The community continued to embrace her. She became a fixture at the Thursday evening gatherings, now held in her own parlor once the house on their land was completed. She served on the church committee and helped organize the quarterly socials. She even reconciled tentatively with her father. They would never be close, but they managed civil Sunday dinners once a month, and Elizabeth proved to be kinder than Clara had initially thought. But it was the house that became Clara's greatest joy. Built on the plot of land overlooking the valley, it was modest by Boston standards, but perfect for their needs. 2 stories, with a wide porch that caught the evening breeze, large windows that let in the desert light, and a study where Clara could prepare her lessons and Reed could do his paperwork.
There was a room for the children they hoped to have, and a garden that Clara planted with determination despite the challenging climate.
On their first anniversary, Reed came home to find Clara sitting on the front porch, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. She'd suspected for weeks, but had waited for the doctor's confirmation before saying anything. Reed took one look at her face and dropped his saddlebag. "Clara, we're going to have a baby," she said, joy and wonder mixing in her voice. "In late spring, the doctor thinks." Reed sank down beside her, his hand covering hers on her belly. For a long moment he couldn't speak, emotions playing across his face too fast to name. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were wet. "A baby," he whispered. "Clara, is everything—" "I'm fine," she assured him. Healthy, happy, a little scared, but mostly just excited. Reed pulled her into his arms, holding her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "I can't believe this. After Mary and baby Sarah, I never imagined—" "This is different," Clara said firmly. "This is our fresh start." "Our future. And it's going to be beautiful." The pregnancy was mercifully easy. Clara continued teaching through the winter, only reluctantly giving up her duties when her condition became too obvious to ignore. Sarah came to help with the household as Clara's confinement approached, and Mrs. Hartley visited daily with advice and encouragement. Reed was terrified. Clara could see it in the way he hovered, and how he checked on her constantly, in the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the darkness. She understood. He'd lost his first wife and child to fever, and the fear of losing her too haunted him. "I'm strong," Clara reminded him one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley. "I'm healthy, and I have the best doctor in the territory. Everything's going to be fine." "You can't know that," Reed said quietly. "No," Clara agreed, "but I can choose to believe it. I can choose hope instead of fear, and I need you to choose it with me, Reed. Our baby needs both of us believing in this." Reed took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I'll try. For you, for our child, I'll try." The baby came in May, during a spectacular spring thunderstorm that turned the desert into a riot of wildflowers. Clara's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Reed paced outside the bedroom door, convinced he was losing her. But Clara was indeed strong, and just after dawn, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the house. Reed was allowed in to see his wife and child, and the sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Clara sat propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with such fierce, triumphant joy that he felt his knees go weak. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Reed approached the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the infant in Clara's arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. His eyes, when they briefly opened, were the same gray as Reed's own. "He's beautiful," Reed whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers curled around his, gripping tight, and Reed felt something in his chest crack open. "He's perfect." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They'd discussed names for months without reaching a decision. But now, looking at his wife and son in the morning light streaming through the window, Reed knew exactly what was right. "William," he said, "after your mother's father, William Charles Callahan, if you approve." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. Hello, William. Welcome to the world, little one." The baby, Billy, as they immediately began calling him, transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and wonderful. Clara discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, managing sleepless nights and endless feedings with determined grace. Reed proved to be a devoted father, coming home during his lunch breaks to hold his son, sitting up with Clara for late-night feedings, changing diapers without complaint. The community rallied around them with meals and advice and offers to help. Mrs. Hartley practically moved into their guest room for the first 2 weeks. Anna came back from Tucson for a visit and spent hours rocking Billy while Clara caught up on sleep. Even Clara's father and stepmother sent a beautiful cradle and a tentative letter asking to meet their grandson. As Billy grew from newborn to infant, Clara found herself marveling at the life she'd built. Some mornings she'd stand on her front porch with the baby in her arms, watching Reed ride off to work, and have to pinch herself to believe this was real. The terrified, broken woman who'd stepped off the train 18 months ago felt like a different person entirely. One afternoon, when Billy was 3 months old, Clara was sitting in the garden with Sarah, watching the baby experiment with grabbing his own toes, when a familiar sound made her look up. The train whistle, announcing the arrival at the depot. "I remember the first time I heard that sound," Clara said quietly. "I was so scared, so lost. I thought my life was over." Sarah smiled, bouncing Billy gently on her knee. "Instead, it was just beginning." "Yes," Clara agreed, "though I didn't know it at the time." She looked at Sarah thoughtfully. "You know, the new teacher I hired is working out well at the school. She could use an assistant, someone to help with the younger children, maybe eventually train to teach on her own. I don't suppose you'd be interested." Sarah's face lit up. "Really? You'd do that for me?" "Not for you," Clara corrected. "With you. You're smart and good with children. Why shouldn't you have the same opportunities I did? Mrs. Hartley can find another girl to help at the boarding house. It's time you built something for yourself." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Clara urged. "Say you'll take the chance. Trust me, Sarah. Sometimes the scariest leaps lead to the best landings." Sarah looked down at Billy, then back at Clara. Yes, I'll do it. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for believing in me." "That's what friends do," Clara said simply. As Billy approached his first birthday, Clara and Reed made plans to expand their house. Another bedroom was needed, as Clara suspected she was pregnant again. This time Reed received the news with joy rather than terror, secure in the knowledge that Clara was strong enough to handle whatever came. The new baby, a daughter they named Mary Anna, honoring both Reed's lost wife and Clara's dear friend, arrived the following spring. Billy, now a toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination, was fascinated by his baby sister. Clara would find him trying to share his toys with her, patting her head gently, singing nonsense songs he made up. On a warm evening in late June, Clara sat on the porch with both children, Billy playing with his toy horses at her feet, baby Mary sleeping in her arms. Reed rode up from town, dusty from a day's work, but smiling at the sight of his family. He dismounted and climbed the porch steps, dropping a kiss on Clara's head before scooping up Billy with a growl that made the boy shriek with delight. "How was your day?" Clara asked. "Long," Reed admitted, "but better now that I'm home." He settled into the chair beside her, Billy on his lap. "I ran into your father in town. He asked if he and Elizabeth could come for Sunday dinner this week." Clara considered. Her relationship with her father would never be what it should have been, but they'd found a kind of peace. He'd proven to be a surprisingly devoted grandfather, bringing the children small gifts and telling them stories about their grandmother, Clara's mother, that helped keep her memory alive. "That would be fine," Clara said. "I'll ask Mrs. Hartley if she can spare Sarah to help with the cooking." Reed studied her face. "You're really all right with him being part of our lives?" "I am," Clara said honestly. "I'll never forget what he did, how he hurt me. But I've learned that holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts him, and the children deserve to know their grandfather, flaws and all." "You're a better person than I am," Reed said quietly. "No," Clara disagreed. "I'm just a person who's learned that love is stronger than resentment, that forgiveness, real forgiveness, sets you free." She smiled at him. "You taught me that, you and this whole town. You showed me what it means to truly belong somewhere." Reed set Billy down to chase a butterfly, then moved to sit beside Clara on the porch swing. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling Mary's gentle weight in her arms and watching Billy's uninhibited joy. "Do you ever regret it?" Reed asked. "Giving up Boston, all that money and status and opportunity?" Clara thought about the question seriously. She thought about the grand houses she could have owned, the society events she could have attended, the travel and luxury her inheritance could have provided. Then she looked at her husband's weathered, beloved face, at their children playing and sleeping, at the desert valley stretching out before them painted in sunset colors. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This, all of this, is worth more than any fortune. I have everything I never knew I needed." Reed kissed her temple. I love you, Clara Callahan. I love you too, Clara said. You and this life we've built, and this community that saved me when I didn't know I needed saving. Billy ran back to them then, demanding that his father come see a lizard he'd found. Reed went with exaggerated enthusiasm, and Clara watched them together, her strong, steady husband and their adventurous son, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. Years later, when Clara was an old woman with silver hair and grandchildren of her own, people would ask her about her life story. They'd heard the legend, the wealthy Boston lady who'd come to Silver Creek with nothing and built an empire of education and community service. The woman who'd turned a small frontier school into the largest educational institution in the territory. The philanthropist who'd used her inheritance to fund libraries and hospitals and scholarships for children who otherwise would never have had a chance. But when Clara told the story, she always started the same way. I was walking away from the depot, she'd say, her voice still clear despite her age. Broken and alone, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Until a cowboy sheriff stopped me and said words that changed everything. Your journey ends with me, miss. She'd pause then, her eyes distant with memory. But he was wrong, you see. My journey didn't end that day. It began again. It began with trust and grew through friendship and blossomed into love. It began when I stopped running from pain and started walking toward hope. It began when I learned that home isn't a place you're born to. It's a place you choose, and a community that chooses you back. And Clara would look out at her children and grandchildren, at the thriving town that had grown up around her, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her losses, and she'd smile. My journey ended with Sheriff Reed Callahan, she'd say, and it began again with us, with love, with family, with the courage to believe I deserved a second chance. And that, my dears, made all the difference. On her last evening, many, many years after that first day at the depot, Clara sat on the porch of the house she and Reed had built together. He'd passed 5 years earlier, peacefully in his sleep, and she'd missed him every single day since. But she wasn't afraid of death. She'd lived a full, rich life. She'd loved and been loved. She'd made a difference in the world, one student at a time, one act of kindness at a time. As the sun set over the Arizona Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara closed her eyes and whispered the words that had sustained her through half a century of joy and sorrow. My journey ended with you, Reed Callahan, and it began again with us. Thank you for teaching me how to live. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for showing me that home is wherever love resides. The stars came out, the same stars that had witnessed her arrival in Silver Creek all those decades ago. And Clara Winthrop Callahan smiled, content in the knowledge that she had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than she'd found it. Her journey had ended where it was always meant to, in love, in community, in the arms of a life well lived. And that was more than enough.